I know my story won't be as interesting as some others here, but it's mine, and all these years later, it's still unexplainable to me and my brother. When we were about 7, we're twins. My brother and I like to sit in our shared room and do whatever it was 7-year-olds do after a school day. One night, we were both at the bottom of our bunks talking and taking turns playing my Game Boy. The door to our room is open, and from the angle that we are laying at, you can see the living room and the kitchen of the apartment, which were connected. For some reason, both of us decided to turn our attention away from the game and look out the door at the same exact time, and we both saw what looked like a dark shadow in the shape of a man running across from the left side of the door to the right. The weird thing is, about a foot or two after our door, where the figure was running towards, was just a wall. I remember us thinking and talking about if the person was hiding just over the side of the door frame. We called our mother and told her the story and asked if someone else was here or it was just her. She obviously freaked out and said no, and when asked if she saw it too, as her room was right next to ours, she said she didn't. As we were already terrified of sleeping in the dark, all the lights in the house were on already, so there was no mistaking what we saw. We also didn't hear anything, we just saw it, which makes the experience even stranger. Nothing else supernatural happened in the apartment to us, and it's been about 12 years since that happened, and I still think about it from time to time. Honestly, if it weren't for my brother being right next to me and seeing it too, I might have written it off as a vivid dream. But I can remember the experience so clearly, and he does too. I honestly have no explanation for what we saw. I was staying up late watching TV one school night when I was around 16. I'm 23 now. I had to get up to go to the bathroom. When I was finished, I opened the door and walked out as normal. I had taken maybe 2 steps when I suddenly felt myself run into something and be slightly pushed back. Without thinking, I apologized as I believed it was one of my relatives. However, when I looked up, as I had my head down before, I realized that what I was looking at was an obscure, human-like shape that was entirely opaque. It was as if I had bumped directly into a shadow that had taken a 3-dimensional form. Before the initial disbelief could even set in, it disappeared. I reached my hands out in front of me, but nothing was there. I literally sprinted back into my room and leaped on my bed. Nothing quite like that has happened to me since, but I definitely had other strange occurrences in this house. I'm wondering if any other people had seen or heard of something similar and can help me find some literature on this description. Three weeks ago, after my grandfather passed, I had my first sleepover. My friend and I went to sneak into the kitchen for a midnight snack. When we turned the corner, a black silhouette of a figure as tall as the ceiling was walking across the living room towards my parents' room. It was very muscular, a body like Arnold Schwarzenegger in his prime. No hair, no clothes. I can only tell this by the definition of the edge of the silhouette. We froze. It turned to look back at us. It began walking towards us. It had one massive eye, like a cyclops. The two of us turned and slammed the door behind us and hid under the covers on my bed, absolutely freaking out and sobbing. My whole life I threw that in the vault, but today, sharing ghost stories with a friend, I finally talked about it in detail. They are floored and mind blown, and I'm interested in hopefully finding out more about this experience. So a few years back, I had gone out with some of my friends to the mountains for a camping trip. And by camping, I mean getting drunk or high around a fire in the middle of the woods, and then pass out in our trucks. I was always the youngest of my friend group, and this took place before I found my taste of mind-altering substances. I'm typically something of a skeptic, and if this had happened nowadays, I would probably blame it on me being drunk. But I was stone cold sober the whole time, which is why I feel so sure of what I saw. We're all out by the campfire, maybe 10 or 15 of us. I'm sitting on someone's tailgate, smoking a cigarette when my friend, let's call him John, comes up to me clearly intoxicated. John was the one who I came out to the campsite with, and probably one of my closest friends of anyone out there. He asked me if I wanted to go on an adventure with him in the woods. I figured that if nothing else, I should probably go with him to make sure he doesn't drunkenly fall over and hurt himself. Not to mention, even though I didn't drink or do any drugs back then, didn't mean I was opposed to fun adventures in the forest. So we walked past the tree line that surrounded the campfire and into the dense trees. The moon was out and it was pretty clear that night, so although it was dark, it wasn't pitch black. We come to a clearing that seemed to be made up by many flattish boulders and rocks. We were looking up at the night sky, and John was drunk talking, and I was listening and nodding with whatever nonsense he was saying. He sat down on one of the flatter rocks and eventually just laid down and passed out. I tried to jostle him awake, but he kept mumbling for me to let him rest for a while. Since this is usually how John behaves when he's drinking, I complied and figured that I'd head back to the campsite and check on him again in a little bit. I go back, talk to a few people, smoke a few cigarettes, and then decide to go back to check on John. Maybe 10 minutes had passed. I'm walking back to the clearing where I had left him, and already from afar, I noticed that he wasn't in the spot I had left him. I keep going, thinking he must have gotten up and wandered off somewhere. As I'm walking, I notice a shadow in shape of a human standing behind some shrubs a few feet to my right. I stopped, figuring that John was just messing with me. I said, "Dude, come on, let's head back to camp." No response. Then the stereotypical, "Please, you're not scaring me." And still nothing. I move closer to the shadow and notice that I can't make out any distinguishable features, no shirt logos, no eyes, or any face for that matter. Just a vacuum of black that stood in the shape of a human, hanging out with me in the forest. I backed away, putting it all together that it wasn't John, and I ran back to camp. I checked the truck that John and I drove out, and there he is sleeping on the bench seat. I did a quick head count, and everyone that I recalled being there was still there. The only thing that convinces me that this was paranormal was the sheer absence of light that this thing took shape of. Just pure darkness. Whenever I tell the story, John always gets the chills imagining this thing was probably out there with him and around him when he was passed out by himself. The general conclusion was that John stumbled back a while after I left him, and I didn't notice that he had returned. Like I said, I'm a skeptic, so I always rationalize these things, but this is one of the experiences I've had that I just can't believe was simply my eyes playing tricks on me. I've heard of shadow people, but I always thought those were things that people just saw during sleep paralysis, not out in the wilderness, fully awake. If anyone could give me any idea of what it could have been, that would be much appreciated. So from the ages of about 6 up until I was around 13, I was followed by what I believe was an evil spirit. Every night I would absolutely tremble at the thought that I had to go to bed. I lived in an old house, probably built in the early 1920s, with my grandmother and grandfather. Every night I would go to bed, only to wake up to what sounded like someone making yawning and snoring sounds in my room, and I would instantly open my eyes and see a grayish figure standing over my bed. Every night it would be there. I had bunk beds, but the bed beneath was taken out and a metal cupboard was placed there. It would constantly scratch the drawers all night long and walk around my room. I'd be absolutely terrified to move. I would stay in the same spot for up to 8 hours. My body would literally be in so much pain, but I wouldn't move an inch. I used to tell my grandmother about this, but she would assure me that it was only a nightmare, and I would put it in the back of my head for the day and go to school, knowing full well it was no dream, and I would have to deal with it that night. My school life was terrible, as I would only get about 1 to 3 hours of sleep a night. I was always so exhausted at school, and used to have to stay back to catch up after all the kids had went home. Back at home, it started getting more intense and scary, to the point I literally thought I was gonna die. What went from walking around in my room, scratching drawers and making noises, turned to full-blown sprinting down my stairs, running into our kitchen, slamming every cupboard door, running back up the stairs, and bursting through my bedroom door and screaming. My grandmother and grandfather never woke up once from this. He used to knock my toys over and break things. He used to literally follow me to any house that I had a sleepover at. I remember one time I was at my aunt's house. It started slamming the cupboards, then burst in my room and stayed at the bottom of my bed all night, hissing like a snake. One time my wardrobe had moved throughout the night, basically blocking my door, only leaving a 10-inch gap. And as usual in the morning, I would get the blame. The worst night I ever experienced was when my granddad went to work early. I'd say around 4-ish. As soon as he left, I heard the slamming of the cupboard doors, so I knew it was coming and I prepared myself by laying perfectly flat under the blanket, like I always do. It burst open my door, and I have goosebumps as I type this now. I felt a sinking in the footing of the bed. Something was on the bed and was slowly crawling up to me. I felt like screaming. I was 10 years old and terrified. It even terrifies me now thinking about it. It slowly crawled up my bed and started scratching the exact spot where my face was. I could almost feel what seemed to be claws slowly scratching at my face. I didn't know what to do, but I remember having the thought that maybe I would wrap my arms around it and wrestle it in the blanket and dash off into my grandma's room to wake her up. But I was too terrified to move, and I really thought I was gonna die. Thankfully, it climbed off my bed and ran up the stairs a few more times, and that was it for the night. As I got older, it started getting less and less until the last encounter, which was kind of weird. I was 13 and just started high school, and hadn't experienced anything for months, possibly over a year at that point, but I still had terrible anxiety when going to sleep. I got ready for bed as usual and turned off my TV. There was a blue light on my TV which reflected onto the wall next to me. I heard a thud at the bottom of my bed and knew something was with me. I can clearly remember this as I was now in my teens. I was thinking to myself that I can't let this win this time. It already ruined my childhood. I can't let it win. I was looking at the blue reflection on my wall to see if I could see anything. I see this huge black shadow come over me, which stayed there for about 5 minutes and left. I say this was my weirdest experience because I felt no threat at the time. It didn't feel like anything wanted to hurt me, unlike the prior years. Could this have been a spirit looking over me? I don't know, but I do know that this was my last experience with whatever it was, and I'm 21 now. My grandparents still live in that house, but I moved out. If anyone could help me in any way, I'd appreciate it. I sometimes wonder what crawled up into the bed that night, and what would have happened if I tried to confront it. It's been years now, and I really want answers. Thank you for listening.
I saw a shadow person. I was out parked on a backcountry road, and I was with 2 of my friends. It started out as a low dark blur. I thought it was a bush at first. It was through the windshield in plain view of all 3 of us. Then, it morphed into what looked like a crouching person, with his head facing downward. Before our eyes, he slowly stood to full height, head still pointed downward with his chin to his chest. Once he came to full height, his head rolled out to look directly at us, and then he disappeared. Naturally, both of my friends were freaking out. I was exhilarated because I'd never seen such clear evidence of the unknown before. I finally drove away at their insistence, but I know all 3 of us saw the same thing, and that it was fucking real. It had an air of malevolence to it that sent shivers down my spine, but I was on a high the whole rest of the night. Shadow people are real. So this happened a few years ago to my fiance and I, while we were living at my mother's house for a little while we were in between places. It was nighttime during the summer, and we were out walking the dog and having a good time, as it had been oppressively hot earlier that day. Our dog was walking alone, enjoying his walkie time, and we were almost home. Suddenly, my fiance stops dead still and presses her hand against my chest to stop me from moving forward. I say, "What's up?" and notice my dog is stopped still, staring intently at something in front of my mom's place. She had this porch light which illuminated the lawn a little bit, and as my sight line went from my dog to the front yard, I saw, well, I don't know exactly. There was a humanoid figure on the front lawn that appeared to be dragging a large contractor-style garbage bag toward the backyard, which abuts the woods and leads down to a creek. It's vague to recall it now, but it was tall, seemingly dressed darkly, maybe in jeans and a hoodie, but it was only partially visible in the porch light. When I looked up, its head moved toward us, and it felt like it was staring right at us. The three of us were paralyzed in that moment, all filled with dread, until my brain decided to kick in. Just turn around and keep walking. My fiance and I turned directly on our heels, and thank God, our dog did the same. Both of us refused to look behind us until we turned a corner much further down the street. Our dog was stealing looks behind us, watching our backs. Once we turned the corner, we called the police, who came around to meet us and did a sweep of my mom's property, the surrounding properties, and the woods. There were 6 to 8 cops total that responded, with a canine unit too. It's a rich area of the suburbs. Here's the kicker though, and why I think this story belongs here. The cops called us back later that night, we weren't sleeping anyway, to tell us they had turned up nothing. No footprints or evidence of anyone on the lawn, no drag marks from the bag. Their dogs caught no abnormal scents in the area. My fiance was livid at them because we definitely saw someone there, and from that point on, we walk our dog with knives and a walking stick at the ready, just in case. As time has gone on though, I've begun to wonder if it wasn't a person we saw, but a thing. How else could it leave no earthly trace of its existence? When my eyes were on it, all I felt was fear, filling my every thought, such that I was paralyzed. And I wasn't the only witness, since my fiance and dog both saw it. And it was definitely dragging something along with it, which should have left a mark on the grass lawn. I've always been fascinated with stories of shadow people, wendigos, and skinwalkers, the latter two not being native to my area, allegedly. I do believe in ghosts, since we live in a house haunted by her deceased family. They didn't approve until I put a ring on it. Did we have a brush with the unknown that night? Or am I just failing to properly rationalize what we saw? Here goes. I can't find any information out about this entity. I'm trying to reach out to see if anyone else has come across her. A few nights ago, I had a dream. I was having a sleepover with a good friend. She was asleep under the blanket. I look at the end of the bed, and there's this long skinny shadow with long wild hair. She reaches out and grabs my ankles and pulls herself up and kind of wraps around me and hisses in my ear. I woke up, and she was crouching beside my side of the bed and reaching toward me. She was so tall, she reached the ceiling, even crouching. She was very thin, with long arms and long claw-like fingers, shadowy skin, long black wild hair, black eyes, and most importantly and disturbing, a grinning mouthful of long pointed teeth. I started punching and screaming. At first, she grinned wider and then disappeared. My partner woke up to me punching and screaming at my side of the bed. The next day, I texted my friend that was in this dream. We're both sensitive, but she feels and sees things stronger than I do and has a very level head. I also knew that she had seen a similar entity a few years ago in a different part of the city. I sent her a sketch, and she confirmed it was the same entity that she had seen. She sent me a painting that she'd done of it, and it scared me so bad, I could barely look at it. Normally, she has an answer for things, but this thing, it scares the hell out of her too.
To start off, I've always had a moderate belief in the paranormal and the unexplained. I am certain there exists a phenomena where we currently do not accept and understand, but at the same time, I don't just want to believe everything I hear from people. Skepticism for me has come along with maturity. Anyway, I'm a 22-year-old male and I live in Portland, Oregon. All of the accounts about to be described occurred in a 2-year window, starting about 3 years ago. Much of this happened at my old house, where my mom, my brother, and I lived. So in this house, there are 3 floors. Bottom floor is the garage and my brother's room. Middle floor is the kitchen and living room. And the top floor is my room, a bathroom, and my mom's room. I would often spend many nights awake, tirelessly working on my music in my room while everyone else slept. Occasionally I would be alone in the middle of the night when I would feel a sense of uneasiness. I would feel as if I was being watched when I knew I wasn't. I felt like this on many occasions, but never thought anything of it, and it never really kept me up at night. Now, the first time I had some sort of clue that something was up was after I had left my house for a week or so. I went on a camping trip in southern Oregon with some friends. During the trip, we had ventured out into a rural town where we could make some calls and use Wi-Fi before heading back to the campsite. I remember my mom telling me that day over the phone that my aunt, let's just call her Anna, had come over to visit her this week, and that last night she hadn't gotten any sleep. Anna had stayed in my room and had slept on my bed, except for the fact that she hadn't really slept. She told my mom the next morning that the entire night she had a fear of ever closing her eyes, because every time she did, she'd feel the presence of a large dark man standing over the bed watching her. My mom told me that she refused to go back into that room and asked my mom to remove me from there for my own safety. I refused and continued to sleep in my room because, as far as I know, everything was normal and Anna may have just had a stressful day and was restless that night. So about a month passes and my cousin is over at the house. He's related to Anna. She is his aunt as well. We'll call him Cade. Cade is 3 years younger than me, so at the time, I was 19 and he was 16. We would always sleep in my room when he would come over, me in my bed, and him on a blow-up mattress on the floor, about 1.5 feet away. So on the first night that he's over, we stay up really late, each of us on our phones. He was watching some car racing videos, and I was watching some deep web horror stories. I later found out that he was creeped out and scared by me watching those videos around him so late at night, but at the time I had no clue, so I kept watching. Eventually, we both fall asleep. In the middle of the night, he wakes up and turns over to go use the restroom when he sees something that makes him instantly nope that thought away. He said he saw a black figure standing between my bed and him, and appeared to be looking down at me, laying on my bed. He pulled the covers over his head and didn't make a noise. Nothing else happened and he eventually fell asleep again. Now, about 6 months later, we had my mom's friend Ashton over at the house. Ashton is a middle-aged man that my mom met through my father, and they had remained close friends ever since. He was sleeping in my room one night while I was over at my friend's house, and he couldn't sleep. He told us the next day that he kept on having extremely morbid dreams about people dying and killing each other constantly. He wouldn't explain much, but he said that he felt afraid to sleep because his dreams were essentially montages of violence. He left the house and things returned to normal. Now keep in mind, up to this point, I never actually seen or felt this presence myself, aside from feeling watched on occasion, so I never really felt too afraid. Then, one day I get home from class and my brother is freaked out. He is 5 years younger than me, and he is unlike me in the sense that he has little to no sense of humor. He doesn't joke around or make shit up. He's very by the books, straight and narrow kind of kid. So I know for a fact that he doesn't make shit up for no reason. Well, on this day he had been home alone while my mom was at work and I was at school. He had been laying down on the couch watching TV when all of a sudden, out of the corner of his eye, he saw something leaning around the wall to his left, just slightly over the edge of the wall, making its head visible. He turned to see what was there, and there was nothing at all. Slightly disturbed, he raises the volume of the TV and tries to forget about it. He suddenly gets this feeling as if something quickly slid across the floor towards him, like a slug, but in a blink of an eye. I don't recall how exactly he felt this was its motion or what he saw to make him feel this, but I do know that he immediately hunched down onto the couch, crouching almost, out of fear of being seen. He told me that this thing literally peers over the couch downwards at him, slowly creeping more and more into his vision. He jumps up and turns around, and it's gone. Nothing is there. I asked him what it looked like from the few glimpses he had, and all he could say that it was pitch black and only had one distinguishable feature: eyes. He doesn't recall the color, but distinctly remembers seeing a pair of eyes each time he saw it. After this experience, however, he never saw it again. Now, this next thing was the first thing that happened to me, and to this day I can't explain it, and it's never quite occurred again. I had woken up at 8 that morning and went downstairs to make myself breakfast. I had laid down on the couch and closed my eyes for a few seconds, and before I knew it, I had almost dozed off. You know that stage right before you fall asleep where you're almost completely immersed, but you can still hear all the sounds of the real world and think cognitively? Yeah, so that's where I was, nearly asleep but not asleep yet. So I'm thinking to myself, what should I think about before I drift off, when I suddenly get one of these black and white visuals. They appeared in an instant, and I can remember constantly thinking, what the fuck? It was like I was looking through the eyes of some sort of other creature that perceives the world in black and white. The perspective I'm seeing is from the corner of my bedroom, and it's very near the floor, as if it's sitting. I almost want to open my eyes and say fuck sleep altogether, but my curiosity gets the best of me. I mentally suggest that this perspective looks towards my mom's room. It elevates and walks out of my room, facing my mom's room. Now keep in mind, I'm seeing the perspective of whatever this is, almost as if I'm controlling it by thought. I then think to myself, okay, if I can make you turn away and start walking downstairs towards my sleeping body, I'm fucking done. Sure enough, after a singular thought, I see the view turn around and start walking downstairs. Now, I'm sleeping on the couch, which is about 4 feet away from the bottom of the stairs. I really wanted to keep this thing walking down until I could bring it close to me and see myself from its perspective, but I remember feeling scared to draw it near me while I wasn't really there to defend myself. So instead I say fuck this as it gets about 5 or 6 steps from the bottom. I open my eyes. I'm back in my real body now, and I immediately get up to search the stairs and later my room, but nothing. Now there has been several other interesting smaller experiences that I don't place too much weight on because it happened under the influence of drugs. For example, my best friend in college, Danny, and I were on acid one time when he suddenly stops talking to me. He is staring behind me and I'm trying to figure out what's going on when I start to feel the burning sensation on both of my forearms, like something is twisting and lightly burning them. He soon leaves the room altogether and comes back in maybe 20 minutes later. The rest of our trip we spent watching movies, and it isn't until the next day he tells me what he saw. He was apparently speaking to me when all of a sudden he sees a large, translucent, but red-tinted being standing behind me. It was at least 6 feet tall. I was currently sitting down as he notices this, and before his eyes, it reaches its 2 arms down, grabs hold of one of my arms with both of its hands, and this is exactly when I started reacting to the burning sensation on my arms, independent of him telling me what he was seeing. This thing, according to him, kept the grasp of my arms and stood behind me until he left the room. He told me that he heard me talking to something and speaking deeply, like I was in a very involved conversation, when there was no one else in the room, and I also have no memory of this. Keep in mind, I had done acid around 4 or 5 times up to that point, and I never had things happen which I couldn't remember. Like I said, since this occurred on acid, I don't fully trust this experience as evidence of anything. The final piece, which makes this all the more interesting, is that my dad's longtime friend, who is sort of mystic, has heard about all these occurrences, and she has an opinion of it, which I think is most likely. See, I've almost died 4 times in my life. These were very close calls, and to this day, I've survived them with no broken bones, no trips to the hospital. Those are stories for another day, but my whole life I felt like I had a guardian angel or something looking over me. Couple that with the fact that everyone but me who spends any amount of time in my room somehow ends up seeing this black thing, except me, who literally sleeps and hangs out in that room every day. And you arrive at the conclusion that she did. This may be some sort of good being, a guardian for me, or at the very least, a benevolent character that is attached to me. I have never felt scared or threatened at any point by this thing, and it doesn't show itself to me, so my opinion is that it's either a defender or a bystander towards me. We have moved houses and I still think about this being often. I wish no ill will to it, and don't even necessarily want it gone. The way I see it, as long as it can respectively coexist with me, I'm willing to stay bonded with it. I have no reason to fear it, and I firmly believe if it wanted to, it could have hurt me, or at very least scared me, and it never did. So that alone takes away any reason to fear it. Anyway, I'm interested in hearing what you guys have to say about this, and what you think about this.